Imagine a courtroom, hushed and tense, the air thick with anticipation. The jury watches, the judge presides, but the most crucial witness isn't alive. It's a ghost. Not a character in some gothic novel, not a whisper in a campfire tale, but an actual, spectral entity called to testify in an American murder trial. This is the unheard, unbelievable truth behind one of America's most chilling historical cold cases. A story so extraordinary, it defies the very fabric of logic and law.
Welcome, true crime enthusiasts and seekers of the strange, to a forgotten corner of late 19th century West Virginia, where the veil between worlds seemed to thin and justice took an unequivocally otherworldly turn. Forget forensic science. Here, spectral evidence was the key to unlocking a killer, proving that sometimes the dead do tell tales, if only someone is willing to listen. Our story begins in the tranquil yet sometimes sinister hills of Greenbrier County. The year is 1897. Elva Zona Heaster Shue, a vibrant young woman, was found dead in her home. Her husband, Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue, a blacksmith, handsome and charismatic, yet with a past shrouded in rumor, reported her passing. He claimed she'd suffered an everlasting faint or heart complications. The local doctor, arriving on the scene without a thorough examination, concurred. Cause of death? Natural causes. Case closed. Or so it seemed to the world.
But a mother's intuition is a powerful, unyielding force. And Mary Jane Heaster, Zona's mother, harbored a gnawing suspicion that something far more sinister had transpired. Zona had always been robust, healthy. How could she simply drop dead? Mary Jane's grief transformed into an unshakable conviction of murder, a mother's heart refusing to accept a lie. She prayed, she wept, she yearned for answers, for truth. And then the impossible happened. Zona, or rather, the specter of Zona, appeared to her mother. Not once, not twice, but on 4 separate nights, the ghost of Elva Zona Heaster Shue materialized before Mary Jane, shivering and in distress. The apparition recounted the horrific details of her death, pointing an ethereal finger directly at her husband, Trout Shue. She revealed that he had violently assaulted her, snapping her neck in a fit of rage, and then cunningly arranged her body to look like she had simply fallen. This isn't folklore. This is sworn testimony that rocked a nation. The Greenbrier Ghost case became a sensational spectacle, forcing the legal system to confront the unthinkable. Could a ghost lead them to a murderer? Could the spectral summons of a dead woman truly bring justice to her killer? Prepare yourself, because we're about to delve into America's only known court case where the deceased became the prosecution's star witness, forever blurring the lines between the living and the dead and challenging everything we thought we knew about crime, evidence, and the afterlife. This is the chilling true story of the Greenbrier Ghost, where the impossible became undeniably real. Her name was Elva Zona Heaster, though everyone knew her as Zona. She was a breath of fresh air in the small, tightly knit community of Greenbrier in the late 19th century. Bright, spirited, with eyes that held a spark of youthful defiance, Zona was the kind of woman who dreamed beyond the everyday rhythm of farm life. She'd known hardship, a previous marriage ending in divorce, leaving her with a young child. But Zona was resilient, always looking forward, always hoping for a brighter future. Then, into her life strode Edward Shue. He was a relative newcomer to the county, a blacksmith by trade, and to many, he seemed the epitome of charm. Tall, handsome, with an air of sophisticated mystery that was utterly captivating to the local women. Edward was a wanderer,
a man with a past that was as murky as his captivating eyes. He had a way with words, a magnetic personality that drew people in, and Zona, yearning for companionship and a fresh start, was no exception. Their courtship was swift, a whirlwind romance that left many of the older, more observant residents whispering behind cupped hands. Despite the subtle apprehension from her mother, who felt an inexplicable chill from Edward, Zona was smitten. They married in October of 1896, a union that promised a new chapter, but instead would lead to one of the most bizarre and contested murder investigations in American history.
Only 3 months later, the idyllic facade of their newlywed life shattered. January 24, 1897, began like any other winter's day in Greenbrier. Edward, after tending to his blacksmith duties, sent a young neighbor boy, Andy Jones, to check on Zona, asking if she needed anything from the store. What Andy found would forever etch itself into the annals of true crime. He discovered Zona's lifeless body at the foot of the stairs in their home. Edward, upon learning the news, rushed back, his distress palpable. But even in that moment of grief, something felt off. Edward's actions, while seemingly those of a distraught husband, were strangely controlling. He carried Zona upstairs to their bed, laying her out. He then called for the local physician, Dr. George W. Knapp, to examine her. Dr. Knapp, a busy man in a rural county, arrived quickly. The examination was, by all accounts, brief and perfunctory. Edward remained unusually close, almost hovering throughout the entire process, purportedly even helping the doctor, though his assistance seemed more like an interference. He told Dr. Knapp that Zona had been suffering from everlasting fever. Imagine a mother's grief so profound, so utterly consuming, that it ripped a hole in the fabric of reality itself. A sorrow so fierce it became the conduit for a truth that defied logic, mocked the law, and etched itself into the annals of American justice as something utterly, breathtakingly unprecedented. This is not just a story of a cold case. It is the chilling, impossible tale of the only time in U.S. history a ghost's testimony convicted a murderer. And at the heart of this spectral revolution stood Mary Jane Heaster, a woman whose shattered world was about to become the stage for a haunting revelation. The year was 1897. The small, quiet community of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, was still reeling from the sudden, inexplicable death of Elva Zona Heaster Shue. Officially, her demise was attributed to an everlasting faint, a vague pronouncement from the local doctor, George Knapp, who barely examined her before declaring natural causes. But for Zona's mother, Mary Jane, the official explanation felt like a shroud drawn over an unspoken horror. It settled over her like the perpetual gray winter fog that clung to the valleys, cold and suffocating. Zona, her beautiful, vivacious daughter, was gone, snatched away at just 23 years old, leaving behind a young husband, Edward Shue, and a gaping wound in Mary Jane's heart. Day after day, Mary Jane sat in her lonely home, the silence deafening, the emptiness a physical ache. Her mind replayed every moment leading up to Zona's death, every conversation, every fleeting look. A mother's intuition, that primal, often irrational whisper of the soul, screamed that something was terribly wrong. Edward Shue, Zona's husband, had been overly protective, almost possessive of her body at the funeral, an unnerving detail that gnawed at Mary Jane. He had dressed Zona himself, insisted on a high collar on the dress, and refused to let anyone touch her neck or head. He even tied a scarf around her neck, claiming it was her favorite. These details, at first dismissed as the eccentricities of a grieving widower, began to fester in Mary Jane's mind,
twisting her sorrow into a sharp, painful suspicion.
Her name was Elva Zona Heaster, though everyone knew her as Zona. She was a breath of fresh air in the small, tightly knit community of Greenbrier in the late 19th century. Bright, spirited, with eyes that held a spark of youthful defiance, Zona was the kind of woman who dreamed beyond the everyday rhythm of farm life. She'd known hardship, a previous marriage ending in divorce, leaving her with a young child. But Zona was resilient, always looking forward, always hoping for a brighter future. Then, into her life strode Edward Shue. He was a relative newcomer to the county, a blacksmith by trade, and to many, he seemed the epitome of charm. Tall, handsome, with an air of sophisticated mystery that was utterly captivating to the local women. Edward was a wanderer, a man with a past that was as murky as his captivating eyes. He had a way with words, a magnetic personality that drew people in, and Zona, yearning for companionship and a fresh start, was no exception. Their courtship was swift, a whirlwind romance that left many of the older, more observant residents whispering behind cupped hands. Despite the subtle apprehension from her mother, who felt an inexplicable chill from Edward, Zona was smitten. They married in October of 1896, a union that promised a new chapter, but instead would lead to one of the most bizarre and contested murder investigations in American history.
But then, the visitations grew bolder, more distinct. They started as whispers on the wind, a gentle rustling that sounded like Zona's name, barely audible above the relentless pounding of her own sorrowful heart. Then, the outlines, ethereal, shimmering, barely there, the familiar silhouette of her daughter, standing at the foot of her bed or by the old rocking chair, gazing at her with an expression of profound, unbearable sadness. Terror mingled with a desperate, overwhelming longing. Was she losing her mind, or had the veil between worlds truly thinned for her? Mary Jane, a woman of simple faith, wrestled with the supernatural. She prayed, she wept, she questioned everything she believed to be true. But the apparitions persisted, growing clearer, more insistent with each passing night.
Zona spoke. It wasn't with a voice, but with a silent, chilling urgency that bypassed Mary Jane's ears and pierced directly into her soul. Zona, and her spectral form, began to move, to gesture. Her delicate, ghostly hand, almost see-through, slowly, agonizingly went to her own neck. It lingered there, a silent, damning accusation. Mary Jane's breath hitched. The high collar, the scarf, Edward's insistence. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. The ghost of Zona, a vision of her vibrant self, then began to reveal more. Not in words, but in vivid, terrifying pantomime. Night after night, the apparition returned, becoming Mary Jane's ghostly confessor, her tragic informant. She described how Edward Shue, her husband, had murdered her. How he had become enraged over a trivial matter, a quarrel over supper, and in a fit of uncontrollable fury had broken her neck. Zona's spectral presence reenacted the horrific act, her hands demonstrating the twist, the force, the final, fatal snap. Mary Jane watched, horrified, as her daughter's ghost meticulously laid bare the brutal truth. The broken neck, the hidden truth behind.
Mary Jane Heaster, Zona Shue's mother, was an immovable force of nature, driven by a conviction that bordered on madness in the eyes of many. For weeks, the whispers had persisted, a chilling narrative of murder delivered by her own deceased daughter's spirit. The ghost of Zona, a fragile, mournful apparition, had accused Edward Shue, her husband, of a heinous crime. But how do you take a ghost's word to the courthouse? How do you convince a hard-nosed, pragmatic legal system that an ethereal testimony holds more weight than a doctor's initial report of natural causes?
The initial skepticism, however, was a formidable adversary. People whispered. Some thought grief had driven Mary Jane to delusion. Others, perhaps, entertained the supernatural, but believed it belonged in the church, not the courtroom. Yet Mary Jane was unwavering. Her persistence was a testament to her belief, an unyielding torrent that eventually chipped away at the solid rock of disbelief. Her target, the county prosecutor, John Alfred Preston. Preston was a man of the law, grounded in facts, evidence, and the tangible. A ghost? That was a bridge too far.
Against all professional wisdom, against the very fabric of legal precedent, John Alfred Preston did the unthinkable. He authorized the exhumation of Zona Shue's body. The decision sent shockwaves through the small community of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Whispers turned to outright gasps. A body already laid to rest to be disturbed based on a ghost's word? It was an act of both profound courage and profound madness. The local newspaper, the Greenbrier Independent, chronicled the unfolding drama, the community riveted by the bizarre turn of events. On a cold, gray day in February of 1897, the unthinkable became a grim reality. A small crowd gathered at the cemetery, hushed and morbidly curious, their breath hanging in the frigid air. The ground, still hard from winter, yielded slowly to the spades of the gravediggers. Each thud of the shovel echoed the tension in the air, a collective holding of breath as the grave was opened. The silence was broken only by the creak of the coffin lid as it was finally pried open, revealing the somber, preserved remains of Zona Heaster Shue. It was a moment steeped in both reverence and macabre anticipation. The body was transported to a local schoolhouse, transformed into a makeshift morgue for the crucial examination. Dr. George W. Knapp, a respected physician, was tasked with the solemn duty of conducting the autopsy. His every move was scrutinized, not only by the prosecutor and Mary Jane, but by the weight of an entire community's disbelief and hope. This was not just a medical examination, it was a test of the supernatural, a potential validation of a ghost's testimony. As Dr. Knapp worked, slowly and meticulously, the tension in the room grew unbearable. Every cut, every observation held the potential to either debunk Mary Jane's story or to validate the most extraordinary claim in legal history. And then he found it.
A gasp, a whispered confirmation. What Dr. Knapp discovered sent shivers down the spines of everyone present, a chilling corroboration of the ghost's spectral account. Zona's neck had been broken. Her windpipe was crushed. The ligaments in her neck were severed, and her atlas vertebrae, the topmost bone in the spine, was dislocated. These were not injuries consistent with a fall or natural causes. These were the unmistakable signs of a violent, brutal struggle. Someone had deliberately, forcefully twisted Zona Shue's neck. The ghost had been right. Mary Jane's spectral daughter had spoken the truth from beyond the grave. The findings were undeniable. The medical evidence now chillingly aligned with the impossible testimony of a phantom. The initial verdict of natural causes, so casually rendered by Dr. Knapp himself weeks earlier, was shattered. This wasn't just a reinvestigation, it was a revelation.
The dramatic autopsy findings immediately led to one inevitable conclusion: Edward Shue. The very man who had claimed to find his wife dead, who had tended to her body, who had prevented anyone from dressing her for burial, was now the prime suspect. The man who seemed to grieve so intensely was now revealed as a potential cold-blooded killer. The weight of the evidence, bolstered by the impossible truth of a ghost's whisper, was too great to ignore. Edward Shue was arrested. The news ripped through Greenbrier County, transforming a local tragedy into an international sensation. A ghost, a mother's unwavering faith, and a prosecutor's audacious decision had turned the world of legal justice on its head. The stage was set for a trial that would forever be etched into the annals of American jurisprudence, a trial where the voice of the dead would stand as a chilling, irrefutable witness.
Imagine a courtroom, hushed with anticipation, not for a confession, but for a voice from beyond the grave. Picture the faces of the jury, a blend of skepticism, awe, and perhaps a flicker of genuine fear. This isn't the opening scene of a Gothic horror novel. This is the astonishing reality of the Greenbrier Ghost trial, a pivotal moment in American legal history where spectral testimony shattered the boundaries of justice and reason. In a small, quiet county in West Virginia, a murder trial unfolded, drawing national attention and etching itself into the annals of the bizarre. At its heart was the inexplicable death of Zona Heaster Shue, a young woman found dead in her home in 1897. The initial verdict was swift, death by everlasting faint. But what happened next would defy every logical explanation and set the stage for one of the most unprecedented courtroom dramas ever witnessed. The husband, Edward Shue, a charismatic blacksmith new to the area, was initially seen as a grieving widower. But behind his tears lurked a darkness, a possessiveness that would soon be exposed by the most unlikely of witnesses. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, was a woman of unwavering faith and fierce maternal instinct. Her grief, however, quickly morphed into a profound unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with the official story of her daughter's death. The lack of a proper medical examination, Edward's odd behavior, refusing to let anyone touch Zona's body, dressing her for burial himself, and placing a high, stiff collar around her neck, all fueled a suspicion that burned brighter than any logical doubt. And then the visitations began, not in a dream, but in vivid, terrifying encounters. Mary Jane swore her daughter's ghost appeared to her, not once, but 4 times over consecutive nights, sharing a chilling tale from beyond the veil. Zona's spectral form, Mary Jane recounted, detailed the true manner of her death, not a feint, but a brutal assault at the hands of her own husband, Edward. The ghost explained how Edward, enraged by a seemingly trivial matter, had broken her neck, twisting it until her life was extinguished. She even pointed to the precise location of the injury, hidden by the high collar Edward had so meticulously placed. This, the ghost claimed, was the secret Edward desperately sought to bury. Mary Jane, a simple country woman with no prior history of mental instability, found herself thrust into an unbelievable position. Her conviction in her daughter's spectral account was absolute, unshakable. She took her story to the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, a man renowned for his pragmatism, not his belief in the supernatural. Preston, initially skeptical, was nonetheless intrigued by the sheer consistency and detail of Mary Jane's narrative, especially how it accounted for Edward's strange actions at the funeral. He also knew Edward Shue had a dark past, already suspected in the deaths of previous wives under mysterious circumstances. It was a gamble, a legal maneuver so audacious it risked making a mockery of the entire judicial system. But Preston, recognizing the depth of Mary Jane's conviction, and perhaps sensing a deeper truth, made the controversial decision. He would allow Mary Jane Heaster to testify about her encounters with Zona's ghost in open court.
The prosecution's argument was not that a ghost was physically present on the witness stand, but that Mary Jane Heaster, as a credible witness, had received information from her deceased daughter that directly pointed to the true cause of death. The judge, presiding over a courtroom packed with onlookers and journalists from across the nation, faced an unprecedented challenge. How could he, a man sworn to uphold the law, permit testimony from the spirit world? Yet, the compelling nature of Mary Jane's story, coupled with the strange circumstances surrounding Zona's death, swayed him. He ruled that while the court did not endorse the existence of ghosts, Mary Jane's testimony was admissible, as it represented her personal observations and experiences, crucial to her unwavering belief in Edward's guilt. The moment Mary Jane Heaster took the stand was perhaps the most dramatic in the entire trial. Her voice, choked with grief yet resolute with conviction, filled the courtroom as she recounted the chilling visitations, the ghost's precise instructions, and the terrifying details of Zona's murder. She spoke of how Zona's spirit described the struggle, the pain, and the final, brutal twist of her neck at Edward's hands. The spectators hung on her every word, some gasping, others whispering in disbelief, but all undeniably captivated. The jury, 12 men accustomed to the solid facts of earthly disputes, listened with a mixture of bewilderment and grudging respect. Could they truly consider the words of a ghost, relayed through a grieving mother, as evidence? The defense attorneys, scrambling to counter such an outlandish claim, desperately tried to paint Mary Jane as delusional, a victim of hysteria, or simply a mother consumed by grief-induced fantasy. They cross-examined her relentlessly, hoping to trip her up, to expose inconsistencies, to break her down. They argued that spectral evidence had no place in a court of law, that it was a dangerous precedent that would erode the very foundations of justice. They questioned her sanity, her reliability, everything but the physical facts of Zona's death, which, ironically, they had little to counter beyond the initial, flawed coroner's report. The courtroom became a battleground, not just of legal arguments, but of belief versus skepticism, the tangible versus the ethereal. The jury was left with an impossible dilemma: to weigh the sworn testimony of a mother, however bizarre its source, against the traditional evidentiary standards of the time. The very concept of justice itself seemed to hang in the balance, redefined by the whisper of a ghost. Would reason prevail, or would the spectral testimony of Zona Heaster Shue sway the scales of justice in a way no court had ever imagined? The nation watched, breathless, as this extraordinary trial pushed the boundaries of law, faith, and the unknown.
Imagine a courtroom, a hushed crowd, and a verdict hanging heavy in the air, not just on the evidence of the living, but on the spectral words of the dead. After days of harrowing testimony, of scientific fact battling the chilling declaration of a ghost, the jury in the Greenbrier murder trial returned. Every eye was fixed on them, every breath held, as the foreman delivered their decision. Guilty. Edward Shue, a man who swore his innocence, was convicted of the murder of his wife, Zona, based largely on the testimony given by Zona herself from beyond the grave, through her mother, Mary Jane Heaster. It was a moment that sent a shockwave through the legal system and etched itself into the annals of American folklore forever. The impossible had happened. A ghost had put a murderer behind bars. Edward Shue was sentenced to life in prison. He never confessed, maintaining his denial of guilt until his death from complications of measles just 3 years later, in 1900, at the Moundsville Penitentiary. But his conviction, fueled by a spectral witness, cast a long and perplexing shadow, forever challenging the very definition of evidence and justice in the United States. This was no ordinary cold case suddenly cracked by modern forensics. This was a case solved by a whisper from the other side, an insane twist that positioned it as truly unique in legal history. No other recorded American court case can claim a conviction born directly from ghostly testimony. Legal scholars, while often dismissive of the supernatural element as anything more than an interesting anecdote, cannot deny its factual impact here. It forced the legal establishment to confront the extraordinary, even if only for a fleeting, bewildering moment. The immediate aftermath was a tempest of sensationalism. Newspapers across the nation screamed headlines about the Greenbrier Ghost and the ghost-dictated verdict. Public opinion was wildly divided. Skeptics scoffed, accusing Mary Jane Heaster of fabrication, hysteria, or manipulation. They argued that her testimony, while compelling, was inadmissible hearsay, and that the jury had been swayed by superstition and the raw emotion of a grieving mother, rather than pure legal reasoning. Others, however, saw it as vindication for the spiritual world, a chilling testament to the enduring power of the soul beyond death. For them, it was proof that justice could sometimes find its way through the most unconventional, even otherworldly channels.
The impact of the Greenbrier Ghost stretched far beyond the sensational headlines of the late 19th century. It cemented itself into Appalachian folklore, becoming a staple of local ghost stories and a point of macabre pride for West Virginia. Zona Shue, the Greenbrier Ghost, became a tragic figure, her spectral vengeance a warning and a source of fascination. To this day, the story is recounted in countless books, documentaries, and campfire tales, a perennial favorite for those who delight in the intersection of true crime and the paranormal. The case also opened up enduring debates that echo even now. Was Mary Jane Heaster genuinely visited by her daughter's spirit? Or was she driven by grief, perhaps even a subconscious desire for justice that manifested as a vision? Some argue that her vision provided a convenient way to introduce crucial, hidden details about Zona's death that she might have been reluctant to share directly, or perhaps had only pieced together through intuition. Others suggest her lawyer, aware of the deeply religious and superstitious nature of the rural jury, strategically amplified the ghost story, knowing it would resonate more powerfully than purely circumstantial evidence. What if Mary Jane, a devout woman, truly believed she was communicating with Zona, and that conviction was the only path to peace for her daughter's tormented soul? What if in her profound grief, she unknowingly provided the prosecution with the vital missing pieces, filtered through the lens of a supernatural encounter? Ultimately, the Greenbrier Ghost case remains an unsolved riddle in the minds of many. While the court delivered its verdict, the questions linger. Was justice truly served by supernatural intervention, or by a mother's profound will, perhaps even a cunning legal strategy masked by the mystical? The legacy of Zona Shue, the woman whose voice allegedly crossed the veil to condemn her killer, continues to challenge our understanding of truth, evidence, and the very thin curtain between our world and whatever lies beyond.
So what do we make of the Greenbrier Ghost, a true American anomaly? A court of law steeped in tradition and logic, where the testimony of the deceased became the linchpin of justice. This wasn't just another cold case solved, it was a paradigm shift, a chilling whisper from beyond the grave that echoed through the halls of justice, demanding an answer and receiving one. Zona Shue's spectral testimony didn't just point a finger, it ripped open a murder, revealing the dark secrets Dr. Trout had meticulously buried. It forced a jury, a judge, and an entire community to confront the unimaginable, that truth sometimes comes from the most unconventional, the most otherworldly of witnesses. It challenges everything we understand about evidence, about proof, about the very foundations of our legal system.
Can a spectral voice truly be admissible? Can a haunting lead to a conviction? In this singular instance, the answer was a resounding, chilling yes. This isn't just history. It's a profound, unsettling question mark etched into the annals of American jurisprudence. The Greenbrier Ghost trial remains a haunting testament to the power of belief, the limits of conventional evidence, and the enduring mystery of the human spirit, or perhaps the non-human spirit. It forces us to ask, what if the unseen really does hold the key to uncovering the darkest truths? What if justice sometimes needs a little help from the other side?